No, record.
Oh man.
Right, record. So I'm recording now, and you should all get your prompt to ask you. Thank you, Chandini. You remembered. Good. I have my note here, but I don't always pay attention to it. Anyway, and then the second thing is, you're right, is my T-shirt. So the T-shirt du jour is, let me share my screen to give you a chance to see what is going on here. Right. Here is my T-shirt, and you should have a photo. Yeah, here it is. If you can't, if you can't see it on the, there we go. You can't see it on the screen. You can see it on on my on my body. And anyone know what this is? What it's a T-shirt of?
Yeah.
It says so right here. Hieroglyphic alphabet, but it's actually a bit misleading because it's not really an alphabet. This is the Egyptian so-called hieroglyphics. You can see it there on the screen at the bottom. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Greek word or built on Greek stems, meaning literally sacred carvings. And these are these are elements of a writing system that was used in ancient Egypt, devised by the ancient Egyptians. It's one of the earliest forms of writing, not necessarily the earliest. There's debate about whether the cuneiform that I told you about last time is older, or whether the Chinese system is older. But there was a an emergence of writing systems about some 5,000 years ago, roughly in the middle of the fourth millennium BC, in Egypt, in the Middle East, and in China. There's debate about whether they were, which one was first, and whether they were devised independently of one another or just what. But it's not something that we can resolve here. If you have access to or are interested in reading about it in the Hawk and Joseph textbook, there is a chapter about writing that gives some details. But I thought I would tell you a little bit about hieroglyphic, the hieroglyphic system. This T-shirt is misleading because it refers to this as an alphabet. You can see here, and it really wasn't an alphabet. Some of the symbols did have the value of individual sounds, but it was never used like an alphabet. It was in fact a mixed system of so-called word writing or logographic symbols, and some phonetic symbols as well, often used together. So this here is the symbol for a house. This is a better representation of it. Here, house, which we understand was had the consonant shell of P and R and some vowel. We don't know exactly what the vowel was. The vowels weren't written separately the way that they are in some alphabetic systems. But there could be what are referred to as the word symbols, the logograms, could be specified further by phonetic or semantic elements that we can call them determiners, because they gave more specific information. So this symbol here could have associated with it this symbol, which is the word for mouth. And the word for mouth in ancient Egyptian had an R in it, either began with an R or was a vowel plus R. So this is this combination here is without the little legs, but this combination here would be a way of saying, oh yeah, this really is the word, a word that has an R in it. So you're right to think of it as per the word for house. But there is also a verb per, meaning to go out, that may or may not have had anything to do with the word for house, but they used the PR of the word for house specified further to make sure that you understood that there was an R involved. And they added what we could call a semantic determiner. These are, anyone recognize what these things are? Any guesses as to what this is trying to represent? Keeping in mind that the meaning of this verb is to go out.
Are they legs?
Person.
Yeah, they're legs. You know, sort of stick figure like legs. Right. So this would be a way of saying, okay, this thing here, yes, it's the word. It has the PR of house, and just in case you miss it, there's really an R there. That's what this phonetic determiner does. But it's not the word for house. These legs tell you that it has to do with motion, and it's actually the similarly sounding word, verb meaning to go out. So it's kind of it ends up being a kind of complicated system, but the Egyptians used it in monumental. They put it to monumental uses. Literally, they put it on monuments. It was for public viewing. There was a small class of scribes, people who could read and understand it. Hence, ultimately they came to be called sacred carvings, because they were somewhat mysterious to the general public, but they were as these pictures show, they were highly representational, even if they didn't. There wasn't a direct connection between the like this particular bird or this one, the eagle, and this one was a quail here. I think this one is an owl, if I remember right. I actually studied hieroglyphs, Egyptian, when I was a senior in college, and there was one of these birds that my professor consistently referred to as the beaky bird, because I think it was probably the quail, because it had it was always represented with a yeah, you can see it a little better with its beak. Whereas this one, the owl, was the M bird, and he said, I don't know if this was actually right, that it's easy to remember because the shape of the head looks somewhat like an M. I'm not sure that was significant for the Egyptians. But these are all highly representational, and yet so it was aesthetically pleasing to see, but it had to be, you had to know the system, and it was a fairly complicated writing system. We know about it because it was deciphered by a Frenchman in the early part of the late part of the 18th and into the early 19th century, named Francois Champollion, using or based on this, which I'm sure you all have some familiarity with as an image. This is the Rosetta Stone. It was an inscription, a bilingual inscription in Greek. That's on the lower part, which was a known language. People knew how to read Greek and what it meant, and the Egyptian hieroglyphic writing at the top. The part in the middle is was a third. Was not a different language, but a different representation of Egyptian. The middle part, the so-called hieratic writing version, and it's kind of like a script version of the hieroglyphic symbols. And I have another, this one here, if I blow it up a bit. If I blow this up too much, it becomes hard to read or hard to see distinctly, but you can see that some of these are the pictorial signs that hieroglyphic is the hieroglyphics are famous for, and you don't see any of those evident pictograms, let's call them, in this middle portion. But I have another, this one here. If I blow it up a bit, you can see a little better this is taking a little chunk out of it and blowing it up further, but you can see the pictorial versions. Here's one of the birds, for instance. Whereas the hieratic version looks not at all pictorial. It looks like more like a script kind of writing. And the Greek, maybe you can recognize a few Greek letters here. Here's a delta, for instance, right here, alpha here, and so forth. Just to tell you a bit more, the Champollion was able to decipher it because there were it was a bilingual inscription, so it was basically saying the same thing in Greek and in Egyptian, with one of the Egyptian representations being the monumental hieroglyphic writing system. And in the Greek, there were a number of names that were known. The name of Ptolemy, one of the rulers of Egypt during the Greek the period of Greek domination there. Also Cleopatra, who you have heard of because she is so famous for a variety of reasons. And so there were names in the Greek that were familiar, and it was what Champollion eventually was able to do was to match certain portions of the hieroglyphic representation with the names, and work from there to something that gave a representation of the name Ptolemy and Cleopatra. So it was this sort of chance find, this bilingual inscription, that propelled him on the way to decipherment. But he also was able to match elements. He was a student of ancient Egypt. He was enthralled by it, and he studied the Coptic language, which is the now it's the sacred language of the Coptic Church. It's the Egyptian, the Coptics being Egyptian Christians of some antiquity. And he was under he made the assumption that Coptic represented the direct lineal descent, direct lineal descendant of ancient Egyptian. So he posited a relationship of the sort that we dealt with in class last week between Old English and Modern English. For him, he thought he could use Coptic elements to get a sense of what ancient Egyptian was like. So that assumption allowed him to match certain elements in the ancient Egyptian part of the Rosetta Stone with Coptic elements that he knew, because Coptic was a living language at the time, and he was able to learn it and work with it. So in the same way that we drew a direct lineal connection between Old English New and Modern English Now, so that we could identify them and say, okay, this probably meant now in Old English. That's a reasonable assumption. He was able to match certain elements in Coptic, this suffix F, and which he knew from Coptic meant he or his, and the S that meant she or her, and based on his what he was doing with the names and matching elements in the hieroglyphic with Greek letters, the Greek sounds. he was able to recognize something that he thought was like an F in the Egyptian and an S occurring in similar places to where they would occur in Coptic, so that he made the assumption that this symbol that he found for in the Egyptian hieroglyphic part was in fact a suffix meaning he or his, and this one was a suffix meaning she or her. And working from there, sort of piecing things together bit by bit, he eventually came up with a reasonably compelling decipherment of all of the hieroglyphic, ancient hieroglyphic Egyptian. So let me see if there's anything else to point out to you here. Oh yeah, so this is the some of the representations of Egyptian hieroglyphs. This is the M bird. You could see the owl with the M-like thing at the top. That's just a mnemonic device for remembering it. I think that one of these two was the one that my teacher called the beaky bird. Maybe it was this one because the beak is more prominent. I don't quite remember. But notice these have consonants, and vowels could be added in as well, so that these were syllables, syllabic symbols, but some of them, like this one for R, could stand as a logogram, as a separate word meaning mouth, as I mentioned earlier. We'll look at that next week. Yeah, this is a little more about how we go from the symbols of the ancient Middle East to an alphabet, which I don't think I'm going to go into now. But anyway, so that's just a bit of fun. I'll try in general to give you something topical, but not necessarily exactly germane to our lesson for the day through my t-shirts. I'm not sure I have 28 of them, but I hope I may have to improvise a bit. But anyway, any questions on any of this? This is really just for fun and interest. I don't expect to. I hope you're interested, but I don't expect you to. I will not test you on this or anything like that. But okay, good. Let me see what I want to move to next. So the point about the lineal descent is it's one that I will harp on a fair bit, because to me it's a really important point that we need to keep in mind as we talk about language history. And this is the assumption that Champollion made about a relationship, a lineal descent relationship between Coptic and ancient Egyptian, was one that ultimately helped in the decipherment. Let's see. I think that was all that I wanted to. Let me just. And I can move this off to the side. I don't need the picture effects. Okay, good. I did want to. One of the potential pitfalls of thinking about lineal descent is that, as we mentioned last time, etymologically related words, and this was one of the morals that I wanted you to take from the exercise you did last week about the coronavirus language in the time of coronavirus, is that etymologically related words can go off in very different directions. We mentioned last time the example of sky and hide, same Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European root at work in both of them, but with some optional elements that led in part to the differences that we see between them, but I would say not it's a relationship that's not at all obvious today and to any speaker of English. And we can contrast that with cases where the relationship is fairly obvious, like between hide and hidden. And there's a cognitive dimension that's important to keep in mind here. And that is, do speakers from a synchronic standpoint, do we as speakers of English today have anything like access to the connections that we get from a diachronic perspective? And I think the answer is no. But the differences between the obvious kinds of connections like hide and hidden and the ones that are totally opaque to us as speakers of the language today, like sky and hide, it's a very significant difference from in terms of mental representations. And there have been different approaches to modeling linguistic knowledge that have drawn on this kind of relationship, in some cases going way beyond what speakers are probably aware of. There was a let me add it here. There was one linguist in the 1970s. His name was Ted Leitner, who you may be familiar. You may have run across this notion in other classes that you've taken. Noam Chomsky, who is credited with the development of generative grammar, which is the leading approach to thinking about modeling linguistic behavior and that we have. There are issues with it, of course, but he in the 1950s and 60s, he kind of revolutionized the way we think about our modeling of human linguistic knowledge. But Chomsky talked about the grammar or the system of the ideal speaker-hearer, sort of abstracting away from speech errors that people make, from hesitations. I mean, when I lecture, I don't produce perfectly well-formed sentences. They stop and start, and I go back a bit, and there are ums and such in the middle. There was one just there. But he abstracted away from that and developed this notion of the ideal speaker-hearer, and said that linguistics is aimed at modeling the knowledge of the ideal speaker-hearer. One of my professors, when I was in graduate school, said, you know, if we were developing a grammar of English, and I'll get back to Leitner in a moment, and we noticed that the word devour always takes a direct object. You can't just devour. You have to devour something, and it has to be overt. Whereas eat, we can say, oh yeah, I ate last night. It doesn't require an overt object. But suppose, this is what my professor said, suppose that someone was about to complete the sentence, or to utter a sentence, I devoured my steak last night at dinner, and just as he finishes the word devoured, he dies of a heart attack suddenly. Would we want to describe that as an utterance of English that had devour without a direct object, and therefore should be part of the corpus that we try to model? Or do we simply say, oh, that there was an extraneous fact there that we want to abstract away from that? So Chomsky was sort of abstracting away from what he considered to be extraneous facts. There's a lot of debate about what should count as extraneous or not, and that's an entirely different issue. But I want to move on. There is a method to my madness here. Chomsky talked about ideal speaker hearers. Ted Leitner said, well, we can go one step further. Let's talk about the perfect speaker hearer. And that would be someone who knows literally everything. Oops, except he doesn't know how to spell. Literally everything about their language. And in particular, for Leitner, what was interesting, and about the lexical relationships. So, and it's an abstraction, it's an ideal of a certain sort, but it's a different kind of abstraction from Chomsky's ideal speaker here. And so for Ted Leitner, things like sky and hidden would be connected in the minds of this perfect speaker hearer. He gave the example of polar cycle, teleology, and wheel. And all of these come from the same Proto-Indo-European root, quell, meaning to turn. And you can sort of see how they, you can sort of see how you might get to some of them, polar, cycle, and wheel, especially in terms of turning. But the forms are so different and the meanings have gone off in different directions, so that I would venture to say that that except for someone who has specifically studied the history of words or has been fortunate enough to take a class like Linguistics 5901 and been exposed to this sort of stuff, a relationship between polar, cycle, teleology, and wheel would not be apparent at all. But for Leitner, he said, well, it could in principle, because they are historically related. They came into, in polar, cycle, and teleology came into English from Greek, ultimately. Wheel is a native English word. Remember the distinction we drew last week between native words and borrowed words, native or inherited words and borrowed words. But even within Greek, it's not clear that the pole, the kl, and the tail part would have been obvious to Greek speakers, except if they had some historical linguistics. And the point is that most normal speakers, and I don't mean to suggest that linguists are not normal, but most normal speakers do not study the etymologies of words. They don't pay attention to the history of their language. All they're presented with is the data that is around them that they absorb and work with in learning their language. So we will often say that speakers don't have access to the history of their language, particularly as children. A 5-year-old learning their language is not going to have access to the kind of information that we've been developing even in the couple of weeks of this class. So so these are probably relationships that are opaque, but we can imagine what Leitner was doing was sort of pushing this to the limit, pushing this idea of linguistic knowledge to the limit. It's saying, suppose you knew everything about the relationships among words in your language. What would our grammatical model look like? It's an interesting question. He wasn't taken as seriously as he should have been, because he was saying, well, suppose someone did make that connection, what would it look like? How would we model that? That was really the question he was asking. I just want to reiterate also this point that I made last time, that a language at any synchronic point in time, this business about speakers, do they synchronically have access to the connections that the diachronic view affords? And are sky and hidden, or sky and hide, are they related in some sense to any speaker, or is polar and teleology, are they related in some sense for any speaker of English? And this holds for a number of for really any language. I know some of you know Spanish, but there was one analysis of the phonology of Spanish that derives a word like leche, which means milk, from a representation, an underlying representation. I'll give you the arrows here. An underlying representation that looks like something like that, locked, which actually is the, as it turns out, is the Latin form of the word for milk, and the argument that was given for deriving leche from a synchronic form that looked like that was the existence of the verb lactar, which means to lactate, to breastfeed, lactate, associated with breastfeeding. And a criticism that was raised of this is that a child learning the language will certainly be exposed to the word leche relatively early on in their lives, but lactar is a more technical, scientific kind of term that they're very unlikely to run into until somewhat later in their life. So that raises the question: how would a child know to derive leche from something like locked without any access to a word like lactar? And that access only comes later through education. It's a sort of more it's like lactate in English. That's not a word that you necessarily learn when you're 3 or 4 years old. So the argument was made that the counter argument was made that sure, lactar exists in Spanish, but for the 5-year-old learning their language, lactar is not going to be a relevant part of the input to developing a representation of the word leche. And so these issues about historical relationships that we've been talking about under the rubric of etymology and continuity and so forth of forms through lineal descent or the entry of other forms through borrowing is something that crops up in theoretically oriented discussions, and it rests on certain assumptions that I think are difficult to maintain, but they're interesting to consider. So I will leave it at that. But if we keep in mind also that the point that a language at any synchronic point in time is a mix of features that have remained the same, stable over some period of time, and features that are innovative, where that innovation can be borrowing, it could be internal innovation within the language itself. That gives us, I hope that it begins to sharpen for us the difference between synchrony and diachrony, which is a sort of a key philosophical notion that is sort of overarching as far as almost everything we do in this class is concerned. Okay. So any questions about any of that? I know some of this probably seems a little sort of, as I say, philosophical or kind of airy in notion, but if you have any questions, of course, please raise them. And if I don't hear from you, I will assume that everything I'm saying makes perfect sense to you. Okay. So another reason for paying attention to these sorts of concerns is that we, in looking at the Old English and Modern English exercise, we were focusing on at first on the differences between them, because the differences give us a basis for thinking about change. But it's important to remember that not all differences are actually signal that a change takes place. it requires us to interpret the facts properly. But once we do that, then we possibly will see evidence of change or evidence that something else has been going on. And I drew the distinction between what I referred to as vertical comparison as a way of, like between Old English and Modern English, as a way of giving us direct evidence of change after suitable analysis, philological analysis in particular, like with the F versus V business in between Old English heaven, and spelled with an F but pronounced with a V, and the Modern English. Or other kinds of analysis. So we applied our syntactic analysis to the question of the doubly filled complementizer, for instance. And what that leads me to want to mention is, I just need to find it, is this the sheet that I had asked you. Let me just, I see now that there are some possible questions in chat. Hannah asks, where can I buy this? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the question is about.
I was referring to your t-shirt.
Oh, my t-shirt. I see. I think I got it in Egypt, to be honest, but when I was there some years ago. But I'll bet you could find it on the internet. You can find anything on the internet. Yeah, but it's a cool T-shirt. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I had put this basic, what I refer to as the basic issues sheet in the in the Carmen module. Because these are sort of higher level, kind of philosophical questions that we're going to be grappling with, and provide a framework for us to think about them. So as we move in the direction of very concrete kinds of things, like the comparative method exercise that you, the Berman exercise that you worked on for today, and the methodologies that we'll be developing from that, I'm going to touch base from time to time with some of these basic issues. The first one I want is this Uruguayan linguist of Romanian descent, Coșeriu, called the rational problem of language change. And he stated it this way: why are languages not invariant? Why are they always changing? I'd like you to think for a moment. I'd like someone to answer this for me. What is the presupposition behind this question? Why are languages not invariant? What does that question presuppose? Anyone? Just as a speaker of English, and you hear a question like that, there's a presupposition behind it.
That languages are changing.
Pardon?
That languages are changing.
Yeah, right. That in fact languages are changing, and so asking why are they not invariant presupposes that they are changing, and that leads us to what we talked about last time, namely the question of evidence. What is the evidence that we have for language change? We will come back to some of these basic issues, as I say, sort of from time to time over the next, particularly in this sort of still introductory phase of the course. But yeah, so how do we know? Well, one way in which we know that languages can change is through the direct evidence that we see of differences that once we interpret them suitably, once we apply our philological acumen, once we apply our syntactic analysis and so forth to them, we say, oh, there really is a difference between Old English and Modern English. So therefore, we have evidence of change. That we refer to as, I refer to that as vertical comparison and direct evidence. What we did in our, and we'll come back to the direct evidence in just a moment, but what we did in your exercise homework number 3 that you are turning in today, the Berman one, is still involved comparison, but I refer to it as horizontal comparison, and it gives us not direct evidence of change, but after we make certain assumptions, only then does the evidence of change emerge. So I refer to that as indirect evidence of change. And the the basic idea behind it is kind of complicated to spell it out like this, but the basic idea is that if you have a feature in one language that matches in some way a feature in another language, and we believe that these languages, which I call A and B here, derive from a common source. Now there's a lot to unpack there. You have to know what does it mean for some feature in one language to correspond or match in some way a feature in another language. The fact of language relatedness turns out to be something that you can't just take for granted. It has to be demonstrated. And we will spend some time later on in the semester working towards exactly that goal of determining how do we tell the two languages are related in the sense of springing from a common source. But in the situation that's outlined here, where you have where you're licensed to make the assumption of relatedness, and you know what it means for this feature, these features in these related languages to match up in a certain way, as long as they aren't identical, then we see here that there's evidence for that at least one change has occurred between the starting point language, which we can refer to as the proto-language. Oops. I'll use LG for language most of the time, except not. There we go. The proto-language for A and B. So proto-language A, B, not a very exciting name, but it's the proto-language for A and B that is the starting point, the linguistic starting point for language A and language B. There has been at least one change between this proto-language feature and the attested features that we see in language A and language B. And the reasoning behind that is, as I spell out here, whatever we start with in the proto-language, either it's the same as one of the languages and different in the other language. That's what this unequal sign tells us. And therefore, either it's the same as F1 prime in the proto-language, and therefore it has changed on the way to language B, or it's the same as what we see in language B, but has changed on the way to language A. So there's at least one change in each of those cases, or possibly it has changed in both languages, so that there's been more than one, and therefore we can say at least one change in such a context. Now, why do I say possibly many more? What is the upper limit on the number of changes that this kind of schema can give us? Anyone have any thoughts about that? Is it just a matter of one change? So suppose we start with F1 prime here in the proto-language. Is there just one change to F1 double prime? Anyone? Think about it. I'm not going to tell you the answer, but I'm going to ask you to think about it. Then we will come back to that at some point. But what I'd like to do also then is to go back a bit to the notion of direct evidence, and let's think for a moment about the ways in which we can get direct evidence. So one of the things we said was that sort of direct comparison of stage X with a later stage. Okay, that's what we did with the Old English and Modern English example. But how can we get evidence about the earlier stages? Where does that come from? Anyone? Okay, well, I'd like you to, I'm going to have you do an exercise. I'm going to put you into, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and put you into breakout rooms, because I want you to consider a particular text, which I will put in, I'm going to put it in the chat now. And I want you all to download it and consider it. Let me find it though. Oh, that's the wrong class. Yeah, okay. So this is a PDF that I would like you all to open up on your computers. I'm going to share it on the screen for a moment. I think I have it over here. Can I open it? Like, yeah, there we go. Okay. This is I'm going to have you listen to a Greek song. Now I know none of you know Greek, but that doesn't matter. So I'll have you first go to the YouTube to get the song. There'll be four of you in a group, and I want you to listen to it carefully, because it actually the reason this is interesting for us is that within the history of Greek, there has been from the middle of the 20th century on, variation between a nasal and non-nasal pronunciation with a stop. So N, D versus D. That variation is part of has been part of Greek since the middle of the 20th century at least. And what I want you to investigate is listen to this song, which comes from the earlier part of the 20th century, sung by this woman, Rosa Eskenazi, who I think has just a fantastic voice. This is a style of song that was popular then and even now, referred to as rebetika. It's kind of like, it's been referred to sometimes as the Greek blues. It originated in the urban centers, especially Istanbul and Salonika in the north of Greece. And the song is called Trava Bremanga Ke Alani, which roughly translates to something like "hit the road, hipster." Though if you want to look at the translation, you needn't do that now, but it's translated as "piss off, rover," piss off in the British sense of scram, beat it. And so this is about this. This manga is a word for tough guy, and it's about this tough guy, and it's sung from the woman's point of view, and she's sort of saying, look, I haven't seen you for a while, what's up? You don't come and visit me, and so forth. And if this is the way you want it, then I'm gonna you should hit the road, and I'm gonna seek greener pastures elsewhere, basically. A typical kind of bluesy song. But so this song actually has a number of possible nasal plus voice stop clusters that I would want you to listen to. I've given you here the timestamp of where they occur. It's about a 3-minute song altogether. So at the 13-second mark, you should hear Mimbirasis. At several times throughout the song, you'll hear this word manga, meaning a tough guy. And I want you to listen for it carefully. I want you to pay attention to whether there really is nasality in the pronunciation. And then at the end, one of the very last things she does after singing is she talks to the musicians, and at the 3-minute and 4-second mark, she says a 2-syllable word that begins with ah and ends in eh, and I want you to listen to that especially carefully. Okay, so this is I'll put you in in groups now. You're to play the song. You don't have to know what the words mean. I've given you a general idea of the context for it, but listen carefully at these just to see what you hear at each of these points in the 3 minutes, and then especially at the 3 minute 4 second mark, and then we'll reconvene and talk about it. Okay, everyone clear what the assignment is? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to put you into breakout rooms just randomly, and there are 14 of you, so I'll make 3 breakout rooms. Okay, I think. So someone has to. I mean, you can all play it together. You can all listen together, and pay attention to the words that I want you to listen for, and the timestamp for when they occur. Okay, everyone clear about that? So we'll put you into 1, 2, 3 breakout rooms. You'll need about, let's say, 6 minutes, a bit of time to get set up, 3 minutes to listen, a few minutes to just discuss amongst yourselves what you heard, and then I'll close the rooms, and we'll reconvene. Okay, everyone cool with that? Yes, 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 yes. I don't see any problems. So I'm going to create the breakout rooms, and you'll be randomly assigned. Please join them. Okay, see you soon. Okay, so I've got 6 minutes. Talk about efficiency. Hello, you're back. All of you now, let's see. Yeah, I think everyone's back now. Good. So did that work? Yes? Were you able to listen to the song? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Thank you. Okay. So, so how many of you heard distinct nasality in all of these first half a dozen or so instances of these Greek words? Did you all hear mimbiasis with the nasal, manga with a nasal repeatedly, glendi, panda, glendo with the nasal? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone not hear the nasality in those? I think it was pretty evident, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that made it particularly interesting then, I think, when we get to this word that she says at the 3 minute and 4 second mark. Did can anyone recall what that word was? 2-syllable word, starts with a, ends in e.
I heard something like amani.
Could you speak up? I'm sorry, I just can't. Can you speak up?
Amani.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay. And did anyone hear anyone hear something different? Should we listen to it for a sec? Let me share my screen and share the sound, and I hope this will work. Let's go to. Did you like the song first of all? It's got a good beat to it, doesn't it? Yeah, it's one of my favorites. She's one of my favorites.
She says lots of morte. Isn't
Morti,
it?
yeah.
Morte?
So there's this word amortisa, which means a sort of a wench, I guess, might be the way we would translate it.
Okay.
So here is. Can you all hear that? Yeah, okay, I'm going to skip ahead to the 3 minute mark and listen carefully, because I think what I'll tell you what I think you should be hearing is is, oh, I can't write it on this easily. Hang on a second. What I think you should be hearing is ade, like that, with no nasality. So listen, let me play this. I'll skip ahead to the 3-minute mark. And she's finished with the song, and she's talking to the musicians, kind of congratulating them. And this word "ada" means come on, or whatever, or hey there, or something like that. Okay, there was a manga. Okay, now listen carefully. Did you hear that? Ade, ade, no nasality whatsoever. Listen again. Yeah, you hear it? Ade, no nasality whatsoever. And I've verified this with Greek speakers and also with phonetic measurement. There's no nasality in that ade. So what does that tell us then about what do we learn from this text about nasal, non-nasal variation? Anyone? We learned something from it. What do we learn? Bearing in mind that this was what the setup that I gave you for this, that the ND variation reported from the middle of the 20th century. That's when we first get people commenting on it. But what does this early 20th century text tell us?
Well, people were starting to do it even in the early 20th century.
Exactly. And I don't know if starting, but they were at least they were doing it. Yeah. And so in the early 20th century. Now, this may not seem like a dramatic result. I mean, it's not like finding the Rosetta Stone or deciphering ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs or anything like that. But it pushes the time frame for the variation between ND pronunciations and plain D pronunciations. It pushes it back about 1 or 2 generations. And actually, it's conceivable that it didn't just start then, but that it was earlier yet. If we had recordings, of early 19th century Greek, we might see it. And in fact, there are inscriptions from the around the 2nd century BC. That show some nasal, non-nasal variation that are suggestive of this being a long-standing type of variation within the history of Greek. But certainly, once we're into the modern era, it's not just a middle of the 20th century phenomenon at all. It's at least almost 2 generations earlier with this. So as I say, it's not a dramatic result, but in a way, it shows us that you got to take whatever crumbs are thrown at you by fate. So we happen to have these songs. We don't have recordings from earlier than I think the earliest recorded Greek that I know of is from a song from 1904, 1905. And the sound recordings only date from about the 1870s or so. So it's not something that we could expect to have much earlier than that. But every little scrap that's available, we can milk for all it's worth and learn something about the language of the time. So what it means really is that we can think about text in the broadest sense, so that songs like this song here can be a text that we can use for the purposes of diachronic comparison. I mentioned movies. Well, when does anyone know when sound was first introduced into movies? It was late 1920s, early 1930s. The first song, the first words coming in a song in a movie by featuring Al Jolson, and that was a dramatic step forward as far as films are concerned. but so that now we take it for granted that there will be audio as well as video in our recordings. But for a long time there were when they first came out, they were referred to as talkies. That is the movies that had talking in them. But interestingly, there is a class of languages for which the audio part is irrelevant. Anyone know what I'm referring to here? What type of language for what type of language would audio not be not matter at all?
Sign languages?
For sign language, exactly. Yes, exactly. So so we had talkies from about the 1930. I should have had the exact date. I'm sorry. Versus sign language movies that predate that, and in fact, it was around 1915 that the American Society for the Deaf made films of signing, and we can use those signs, those that in this case visual evidence of language. We can use that and compare it with signs in American Sign Language today, and do the same kind of comparison across same kind of vertical comparison that we were referring to. I think it was 1911 actually for the sign language movies. So if we take text in its broadest sense, we can really make linguistic hay with almost any of these texts that are available to us. What other kinds of direct evidence can we find? Well, sometimes there will be comments from either overtly focused on language or just lay people making comments that we can again use to our advantage. So in the Hellenistic Greek grammarians use the word tonos, referring to the accent that was found in Greek words. Now, the accent today is a stress accent. But tonos was a musical term referring to pitch. So in musical treatises about in ancient Greek, we find references to tonos, and it refers to pitch. So that tells us that because they use the same term tonos to refer to the accentual system of ancient Greek, Hellenistic Greek is Greek of about the 2nd century BC into the 2nd century AD. Just to give you a sense of the time frame. But it's a stress accent today, but they used a musical term for pitch, suggesting therefore that there's been a change in the accentual system, in the realization of the accentual of accentual units from a pitch-based accent, tonos, to a stress-based accent. Again, these are inferences that we make based on the use of the term tonos. So basically, we try to take advantage of anything that's available to us. William Labov, whom I have mentioned to you from already a couple of times, and his name will crop up again and again, talked about historical linguistics as the art of making the most of, he says, bad data. I would say not bad, but rather let's change that to imperfect data. And basically what he's saying is anything that you can use to get a handle on what was going on in the past, and then use it to compare with what's going on in the present, you should. And historical linguistics is really this science, or this art form, if you will, making the most of imperfect data. I think that the reason I say imperfect instead of bad is I think I would reserve the term bad data for data that's just fake. So made up data. Sometimes there are so bad would be things like mistakes in data. Sometimes there's so-called ghost words that appear in dictionaries because someone thinks they read a symbol in a particular way and leading to the thought that there was a particular word which a later read or better reading of the text gives you clears out of the way. But imperfect it rather defines what we the state of affairs that we have to deal with. So there's also I guess we're not going to get very far into our Berman example today, but we'll reserve that for next time. But there's also we can learn even the first thing that we read by so overt commentary on language change within a lifetime. That's really what Kathleen Parker was doing. She said, well, I've started hearing people say X and I don't like people saying that. Okay, but that was, from our point of view, that's an observation that she made that we can draw on and say, okay, well, we can all of us, I think about our own usage over time. And, as I mentioned, I think the first day we have a personal diachrony that we can draw on in trying to get a handle on language change. As always, we have to be careful, and I'll end, I think, with just this. We always have to be careful because not all differences equal change. So let me consider the following. If you had 3 units of rope of a particular that were 12 inches long each, we might say 3 feet of rope. Is that right? Everyone agree with that? If we have 36 inches of rope, we would have 3 12-inch units. There are speakers who say, and I wonder if any of you have heard this, who say 3 foot of rope. Have any of you heard that? 3 foot of rope? And in general, with measurements of this sort, it looks like we're using the, looks like we have the singular versus plural feet. Now, which one is an innovation? There's a difference here. From our, I dare say, I venture to say that most of you are feet speakers. You would say 3 feet of rope, and you can own up to saying 3 foot of rope if you want to. There's no stigma attached. I'm just this is just a descriptive exercise. But I dare say that most of us say 3 feet of rope, and if we hear 3 foot of rope, that's a difference. But is it a change? Has this person who says 3 foot of rope, have they innovated away from using the plural? And the answer is so is foot an innovative use of singular? And the answer is actually no. That foot is the archaism here. It comes from Old English genitive plural. So that so foot in this sense means 3 of feet. So it's using a genitive and a plural of a genitive because there's more than 1 foot involved. Genitive plural that has come to look like a singular, and it's found just in this. This plural use is found just in this construction with numerals. 3 foot of rope, reflecting Old English 3 of feet of rope. So actually, we might look at this and say, oh, they've innovated the use of the singular, but in fact, no, foot is the archaism, and speakers like me or like you who say 3 feet of rope, they've innovated the use of an overt plural in this numeral expression. Okay, so we're just about out of time. As always, we haven't covered everything that I wanted to cover, but that's okay, because that leaves us time for thinking for more. We will talk about Burmese next time, I promise that. And I have a few other things. I don't think I'll revise this syllabus yet, because there's still a bit of wiggle room in the syllabus in terms of what we're doing. And there's no assignment for Wednesday other than just doing whatever readings are appropriate based on what's in the syllabus. Because we're going to be moving into talking about the comparative method, developing that in greater detail. I will give you a homework assignment on Wednesday that will be due the following Monday, a week from today. So you'll have something to work on over the weekend. I'd hate for you to have idle hands after all. Okay, good. Any questions? Any last minute questions from anyone? Nope.
I have a technical question.
Okay, sure, go for
What
it.
is this? How do you use the CF? Like you wrote CF Kathleen Parker. I've actually never
yeah.
learned how to use that.
CF, actually, there's something, believe it or not, something linguistically interesting about that. So CF, of course, there's always linguistically interesting stuff. CF stands for, it's from Latin, confer, like our verb confer, which means to compare. So CF literally means to compare. So I was drawing your attention to compare Kathleen Parker and her commentary on language change within her lifetime. What's linguistically interesting about CF is that you will see many people write it as C period F period,
Yeah.
as if it were two words. And I think we talked about analogy, if you remember. And I think that this is on analogy with other Latin abbreviations like EG
IE.
and IE. Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool.
Okay, but it means confer or confere, meaning to compare. I think there may be an E at the end there. It's an imperative form, so compare this. But don't write it as C period F period. Write it as one word, CF, or one. There we go. No, it's because it represents Latin one word. Okay.
Okay.
So, good. Thank you for asking. Good. Anything else? Okay, great. Then I will see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good rest of the first day of the week. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So long, everyone.